Thank you, Salma. So before we start our session, we would like to have a photo session with all the participants. So please turn on your cameras and give your best smile. I will count 1, 2, 3 to lead the photo session. And for the committee, are you ready to take the photo? Is it Salma or is it Hanifa who is taking photo?
Salma.
Okay, Salma. So how many page, Salma, do we have?
2 page.
Okay, 2 pages, right. So let's start with page 1, yeah? Okay, page 1, 1, 2, 3. Okay, and then page 2, 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you so much. Now, I will introduce our speakers today. Today we are very honored to have Professor Iva Strnadová from the University of New South Wales as our speaker. Welcome, Professor Iva Strnadová. Good evening.
Hello, everybody.
Welcome back. This is your third session for Center for Lifespan Development.
Thank you very much for having me. I feel very honored.
Thank you so much for accepting our invitation. Right, yeah. Can Salma please present the CV of our speaker today? Thank you. Yeah, so Professor Iva Strnadová is professor in special education and disability studies at the School of Education, UNSW, Sydney. Her research interest is special and inclusive education, disability studies, social work, health, psychology, and social sciences. And we can find many of Professor Iva Strnadová's publication is around school transition. Yeah, among her extensive publication, her latest publication is she wrote with Julie Lobsing and Denker in 2021, entitled "The Importance of Sex Education for a Successful Post-School Transition Experiences of High School Girls with Intellectual Disability" at British Journal of Learning Disabilities. You may search more or explore more about Professor Iva Strnadová on the internet. Thank you so much, Salma. Right, yeah, so this topic, I trust that this topic is very relevant for nowadays, especially in Indonesian context, where schools are starting to start in-person learning, moving from online to offline learning. And for the Center for Lifespan in Development, actually we are starting our very initial research on school transition. We have around 8 students, master students who are researching this topic. It's like an umbrella research, with a overview topic on school transition, and each of them has their own specific topic for their research. So I trust that this session today is very valuable, and I think the students will have a lot of questions for you, Iva. Okay, so please, you may start your presentation, Iva. Thank you.
introduction. I think I would just add to the introduction that the exploring diverse transitions as experienced by students with disabilities and their families has been a long-term passion of mine, and really exploring diverse angles that are related to transitions. And secondly, I think that's very relevant and probably will come through during my presentation. I am a really strong believer that everything that we do for the students with disabilities needs to be in a way co-designed and co-produced together with them. They need to have a very active role. And so even when we think about how to support the students and how to make their transition successful, they really need to be part of this process and of this brainstorming. It's not just about reading research literature, not that it's not valuable, but it's actually asking the actual students with disabilities. And I think we sometimes forget about this. I would also like to, at the beginning of this presentation, do what is very traditional in Australia, and that is acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where I reside on, who are Cammeraygal people of the Eora Nation. And I would also like to acknowledge the traditional Aboriginal custodians of the land that own the UNSW Kensington campus. That's my university campus. And these are the Gadigal and Bedigal people of the Eora Nation. At today's presentation, I've been asked to talk about like 4 key topics, which I think make perfect sense in a way as it was structured. Thank you, Elga. And that is talking first about the whole concept of transition and what do we mean by saying that we are focusing on schooling transitions, and how these look like throughout the lifespan. And because of here is the audience mainly of teachers and school counselors, as my understanding, I will very much focus on diverse transitions as experienced by students or children and young people with disabilities. I will also talk a bit about what does research tell us about schooling transitions and students with disabilities during the pandemic. And this is something that's only starting to be unpacked in research literature. We have some research studies that mostly look at the whole transition from face-to-face to online learning during the pandemic. And to be honest, the body of literature that will then look at the transition from online back to face-to-face, that is yet to come, because we are globally at a similar stage. We are all planning to come back gradually face-to-face in our teaching and learning. I will also talk today about what are the schooling transition needs of students with and without disabilities, but I will particularly focus on students with disabilities when considering the move from online learning to face-to-face. And also I will talk about some of the supports that I think are critical to use for students with disabilities in this shift and in this transition. So to start with the first part of the presentation, what do we actually understand by the broad term transition, and how do these look throughout the lifespan? Generally, the literature tells us that applications to students with disabilities. And so I would like to first start with inviting all of us to think together what are some common transitions that are in your knowledge and experience that are experienced by students with disabilities. To do this, you can use annotate functions. So when you have the a microphone, video, and the chat function. One of the functions there is annotate, and when you click on that annotate button, you will see there different options, including text. So you can actually decide where on this slide you will write a text in response to my question. You can, of course, also use the chat function to come up with some transitions that that you know and about and are relevant, or you can just simply raise your hand. So we have so many options. So I'm really looking forward to find out about what are some common transitions that we know students experience. Students with disabilities.
Yes.
Especially.
Could we also write those common transition experienced by all students, Iva? Like
definitely, I think all students, many of the transitions that are experienced by students with disabilities will be in common, but there are some that add additional layers for students with disabilities. So please feel free to do both. I think we can then unpack it. Good point, Helga. Thank you.
So please, participant, you can do an annotate, on the top of your screen. View option, drop down menu, you will see annotate, or you can just write, drop on the chat box, or just raise your hand.
Yeah. And if you want to annotate in your language, I'm sure Elga will translate it for me. So don't feel restricted by this. I will not be understanding. I admit that, but I'm sure somebody will translate.
Jadi pertanyaannya adalah pengalaman transisi seperti apa ya yang dialami oleh anak-anak atau siswa di Indonesia ya, boleh anak-anak atau siswa pada umumnya, boleh juga siswa yang mungkin memiliki kebutuhan khusus ya. Silahkan dituliskan dengan cara menganotasi ya. Di screen itu bagian atas ada
There is one in the chat which I need translation. Pretty please.
Yeah, I will translate. Actually, this is from Dwi Darwati. Yeah, she is actually she is not answering your questions about what are the experiences of transition, but she actually has a question.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so she asks, please give us tips or best strategy in designing different kinds of play activities to to support children who are experiencing learning loss. Yeah. So Iva, you could keep this for later if you think this would be more relevant later on, or if you want to answer it now, that's also fine. Yeah. So
I wonder what is meant by learning loss. Is it is it the loss of school community, being face to face, or
Yeah.
I'm not sure what
Yeah.
is the focus of the question.
If you want to answer it now, I could invite Dwi-Darwati to explain more about what she meant by
We can leave it for later, and but I would like to come back to it because I would like to understand more the question to answer it. And meanwhile, I'm excited to see the answers that are coming up on the annotation board. Thank you, everybody. So I can see that there is unpacking of the moving from school to school as a result of great retention. I think that's a fantastic point and really good transition that has been reminded here us of. Leaving family and home for study or job. I really like that one, and I would also dare to say that moving this is really kind of multi-layered to me almost, because the challenge can be the post-schooling transition, really. So leaving home, finding a new place to live, starting to work or studying at university. But it can be also that ongoing day-to-day leaving of home and transitioning from one place to another, which can be really challenging for some students with disabilities. So I think you've kind of covered a few layers there, which is lovely. Absolutely a good point about the adaptation with school atmosphere. So that whole transition into schools and new routines that are related to schools. And they can be different with friends and teachers. That is a really good point. Moving from home environment to school, fantastic point. Somebody seems to have a good early childhood and primary school experience, and absolutely, that's a critical transition. Different school culture, and I think that if you're changing schools, which is very often the case, especially for students with disabilities, at least in the Western countries, and I'm not sure what the situation is in Indonesia, but that can be a very demanding transition. Finding social circles, so the transition there would be for the students finding a new group of friends, I assume. And it's really interesting. Most students, especially newcomers, so grade 10, shock with school cultures when they come to school for offline learning. And it's interesting I would be really interested what's meant by the shock with school culture, whether it is the regime that the schools have and the very clear structure of learning, and also less distraction that the students probably would have at home. And that is definitely a difficult transition to handle. Yes, you have mentioned some excellent examples of transitions that the students would be experiencing. I will now, sorry, I'll just clear the space, and I'll move to the next slide. Excellent. So some of the transitions, and you've mentioned some, but these are some. The transitions can be difficult for anyone. We don't have to have a disability to experience demands of transitions, and the most typical kind of vertical transitions would be some of those that you alluded to in your responses, and thank you very much for your engagement, be it transition from home to primary school, transition from primary to secondary school, transition from post-school to from school to post-school life. Those are very, very straightforward transitions experienced by anyone and can be difficult for any child. But of course, having a disability does add another layer of complexities to this. I would also say that if I think specifically about students with disabilities, then there is the transition from and to special education settings. And I am not sure what the experience is in Indonesia, but for example, in many Western countries, and Australia is a good example, if student with disability, especially those that have more impact of the students' functioning, these students would mostly attend the mainstream school only on a primary school level, but at some point they do transition either to support units or to special schools, and that's a really difficult transition to make. And I say here from and to special education settings, but in all honesty, usually it's a one-way road. It shouldn't be, but it is. Another thing that I haven't seen mentioned in your responses, and I think it's something again to really consider for you, is that we know that many students with disabilities are, particularly with some disabilities, are overrepresented in juvenile and criminal justice system, and that is a worldwide fact supported by research. And this is very, very often the outcome of not having enough education around, relationships, what is healthy and what is unhealthy relationships, sex education, what is appropriate and not appropriate. And so they will have a more likelihood to end up in juvenile justice settings and schools, simply because we failed them as teachers and educators. We did not give them the education they needed. And so the whole transition to the juvenile justice setting and then back to mainstream school can be a really critical one, and a very demanding one, especially if there is not enough communication between the systems, and that is very often the case. Absolutely relevant to this lecture, of course, is the transition to online learning and from online learning back to face-to-face. So these are some bigger picture transitions, but also many students with disabilities will struggle with transitions between just activities. As an example, many students on the autism spectrum might be very much set in their routines and making change just between the activities, or even the transition between the classroom, which becomes more predominant on the secondary school level, can be extremely challenging for them and need a lot of preparation to succeed in these. And even like really between people. We know that in primary schools, you would have usually one teacher that teaches the students, and so the students can develop the deep relationship. While once you move to the secondary school, suddenly you have different teachers for different topics. You move the classrooms around the school. You sometimes have different classmates for different classes, and this does become really confusing, challenging, and often frustrating work. So you can see that there are so many transitions, and I'm sure we could talk a bit about some other ones. And I would always like us to keep this in mind when we're talking about transition, even beyond pandemic, because we will eventually return to face-to-face learning. Maybe some elements of online learning will stay, but the students will continue to experience all these different transitions where they need our support. And so I would like us always to be able to have a bit of a bigger picture and be considerate about these transitions. And I also want to say that there is really such a huge body of research literature and different transition models that really look at how we can best support students in any of those kinds of transitions to succeed. Traditionally, most of these transitions models had a very simplistic view of what is there for the students, and so they would rather look at either employment, or they would look at employment and maybe living options post-school, but wouldn't explore the different elements of transitions and layers of successful transitioning as some later models. And I would really like to, so I would like to ground us a bit in the theory which we will then very easily transfer to practice, and that is the taxonomy for transitioning programming by Paula Kohler. And I really would love to encourage you to become acquainted with this taxonomy. It is one of the few, I think I know only of two really transition models that are grounded in research evidence, and this is one of them. So according to Kohlers, for any transition, so we are talking school to post-school life, primary to secondary, but also, you know, different modes of learning, as we are talking in this presentation, there are 5 key areas that we need to keep in mind to make the transition successful. So these are, first of all, student-focused planning. So every transition planning needs to be absolutely centered around the student. And most importantly, the student actually has to actively participate in this transition planning. And so what we very often do is we plan for the students rather than about. We plan for the student rather than with the student, the transition. And I think it's sometimes mind-blowing experience for the teachers just to ask and find out that the students can give them really good guidance in what their needs are in the whole transition process. And this becomes especially obvious when we talk about the students who tend to be very much excluded from this engagement, and unsurprisingly, those are usually the students with intellectual disability or on the autism spectrum. So usually students where in some shape, way, or form the cognitive processes are impacted by the disability, which makes us think very wrongly that they don't have the cognitive capacity to take part, and that is of course not the case. So even if we are talking about the a transition that is at the heart of this presentation, which is transition from the online learning to back to face-to-face, my absolutely first step in the transition planning would be talking to the student and exploring really what are their needs. So what are their anxieties, struggles, worries, what they would like to see happening in the school, what they maybe think could help them, and then really think about how we can implement it in this transition. Equally important, of course, will be the family involvement. So that's another pillar of Kohler's taxonomy. And that is really very much about making sure that family is involved in the process, but also empowered. Now, again, the families have experienced more than ever during the COVID pandemic. I would, to a degree, over-involvement, because they suddenly were faced with homeschooling while balancing their jobs, etc. But not always that really genuine involvement when we consult the parents as teachers. So again, after talking to the students about their needs and worries and maybe what could help them, I would of course consult the families about the same thing. So if I'm planning the transition back from online back to school, these would be the absolutely critical conversations. And it's really important also to know that these conversations are not one-off conversations, right? These are ongoing conversations that need to be revisited. Another really important pillars of Kohler's taxonomy is, of course, the student development. So always being always being aware or of the areas that we want to focus on and develop during the transition process. So for us, the transition from online to back to FaceTime learning, it's not the end goal in itself, right? Our end goal actually is the students' development and the fact that we want the students to achieve their educational, social, and other outcomes. Being aware of some program structure, so what things need to be in place to make sure that we achieve this. And then this is very often a kind of Czech saying would be poor relative. So often forgotten fifth pillar of Koller's taxonomy, which really looks at interagency collaboration. Especially when we talk about students with disabilities, there is usually more than one profession involved that we need to collaborate and communicate with and get tips and feedback. So, for example, we might need to talk with some of the students' therapists. Many of our students with disabilities will be using services of speech therapists, occupational therapists. There are, of course, many other. And these professionals can often have some very critical insights about how to best support the students' transition. So again, not just those bigger picture transitions, such as we talked about, high school to post-school life or home to primary school, but also those that are of the nature as we're talking today, that transition from online learning back to FaceTime learning, and how we can really best support the students in this process. So I will come back to this model again, but I will just quickly share with you a website that I would wholeheartedly recommend to you to explore. Give me just one moment. Yep, here. And I will also give you a link to this website into this chat, so you can save it and explore it in your own leisure. So as I've mentioned, this taxonomy for transition, and now also putting into chat the link. So if you have any chance to download this resource, it's free of charge. And really beautiful resource. It nicely unpacks the different areas. So I've talked around the 5 key pillars of the transition planning, but you can actually see then some considerations to think about when you are doing the transition planning. And while many of these key points that you can see here are related to post-school transition, you can very easily see how this applies to different kinds of transitions. You have here also some thoughts around the students' development, so what skills we need to consider and in what way. You have there also the interagency collaboration and what are some of the things that we need to be very mindful of when trying to apply this approach to transition planning. The family engagement is really important, and again, just some things we need to think about, such as how can we prepare families to really best engage with the schools and be the best advocates for their children? What are some empowerment strategies that we can use? Do the parents know the legislation and what the rights of their children are? I don't know how about in Indonesia, but it's parents here in Australia don't have very good awareness of what their rights are in terms of school access and relevant issues. So I would just really love to encourage you to explore this at your own leisure, but I think that you will find here many very, very good things that you can use in your own school, and that can make your transition planning process, of course, much more efficient. In terms of the transition planning, one of the things that we always need to remember, and again, something we know so well from the research, is it needs to happen in timely manner. And many students, not all of them, but many students with disabilities need more time than other students to really prepare and manage well the transition. So the time is of the essence. I don't know if you are already fully back face-to-face in Indonesia, or whether it's kind of staged and it's prepared for rolling out. But if that's the case, and you're not back fully into face-to-face learning, that you are doing the best thing you could have done in attending this event, because it makes you to sit right now and think about what can we do in timely manner, because very likely our students with disabilities will need more of your effort and time. And so I think this is very proactive, and I applaud you for that, because there are many there are many professionals who more do like last minute thinking. So this is just a bit of an overview or background to the transitions. I could talk for 5 days about transition planning. So I know that we don't have that, but again, this is something to keep in mind. Leading then back to our context, which is a pandemic, COVID-19. There has been a research happening in this space. There has not been really like the obvious research that would use the language of the transitions in a sense, but there has been definitely a lot of research going on of what is the impact of moving from sudden face-to-face learning over the last 2 years to suddenly online learning in the context of many lockdowns as we have experienced. And so I thought I would just tell you some of the key research that has been published in last 2 years and some of the key findings, and I'm pretty sure that we can resonate with many of these findings. But before I do that, I would like to ask you and about your experiences. What have been the main barriers to learning for students with disabilities during COVID? In your school experiences, primary, secondary, you will have diversity. We might have school counselors here who will have again a particular perspective. So again, pretty please, if you could use the annotate function or raise your hand. I am friendly, you can talk, and it can be translated, that's fine. But what are some main barriers to learning you have seen?
Again, we can write those barriers to learning for students with and without disabilities. Okay. Silakan ya Bapak Ibu, rekan-rekan, apa sih hambatan belajar yang dialami oleh siswa ya selama COVID-19 begitu.
COVID-19 was the only part I understood, Olga. From your but at least something.
Yeah.
So you can use also chat. Nice. I'm so happy you are annotating. Oh, absolutely. And when I thank you, whoever wrote this comment, absolutely. And this is something when I will be introducing the international research that has been a reoccurring barrier. I think both the knowledge that you mentioned here and capacity is important, but kind of almost two separate and when together very compounding barriers that make it very difficult. Well, there are some other barriers. I'm pretty sure this is not the only one you experienced.
Ya, silahkan menuliskan, boleh di chat, boleh di anotasi, boleh angkat tangan, ya. Apa sih hambatan ya yang dialami oleh siswa-siswa?
Excellent point, Kuku. I hope I didn't butcher your name. If yes, I apologize, but that's a great point. Not much time for physical activity. Physical activity is so important for child's development and learning, and that has definitely been a huge barrier. And you know what's interesting? I have not seen research talking about it. So it's really, I'm very happy. Thank you for pointing that out. Yes, thank you very much. Not all parents can use technology. Absolutely. So that is a huge challenge in upskilling not only just the children using technology, but also the parents. A lack of resources and infrastructure. I think this is absolutely critical one, and there are multiple layers again, and some of them were already reflected in research, some less so. We know that some families do live in very poor economical conditions, and this is these inequities, these socioeconomic inequities have been really highlighted during the COVID. In Australia, here in Australia, it was very common that the schools were trying to support families where, for example, there would be just one computer in the whole household, but suddenly both parents needed it for their work, and both or more children needed it for their engagement with learning. So, or there would be only one phone, and the phone would be used just to connect to online space. So thank you, that is absolutely a critical one. The child feel bored about our learning even accessible. And if we talk about inclusive education, to what extent is it differentiated for students with disability, or having students with disabilities in mind? Absolutely. I don't know who wrote it, but brilliant point. Teacher in special education might be really great experts in special education, right? But they are not expert necessarily in distance learning. And so this is where that, again, if I can remind you of the beautiful skilling their staff. So that was an excellent point. Low motivation, yes. Too many homeworks. Interestingly enough, that I did not come across in research, but yes, probably depending also on the individual experiences.
And that's very Indonesian context, Iva. Too many homeworks.
Okay, fair enough. Because
too many tasks. Maybe not in Australia, but in Indonesia, definitely.
Oh, interesting. That I'm so excited you're doing the research with the master's students, because that, I think one thing that is lacking in international research, a lot of that is published is, as usual, global north. So it's, Australia, UK, America, but there is not that much about, other countries. And I think that's a huge gap. There is also a few points in the chat. Not all parents have enough time to accompany children with, yeah, absolutely. And some parents said e-learning could impact their emotional well-being. That's a huge, of course, impact of mental well-being on everyone, children and parents, has been very well recognized by research, and this is, of course, part of that. Children getting too attached to their gadgets, that has been very much recognized by the research, and it will be quite a challenging transition now back to school and finding that balance between using the electronics and mobile devices in balance with face-to-face learning. And interesting that also Nepal has the same experience with homeworks. That's really, I had not that knowledge, so thank you. I've learned something from you. Thank you. So now these are all absolutely excellent and very true points. Low self-regulation, and again, I would say that could be the case for, of course, students with and without disabilities, but for some students with disabilities, kind of their condition brings an extra layer to the ability to self-regulate, and so this makes it just that much more challenging for them. So that's a really good point. Thank you so much. Absolutely great points. I will again now move to the too much polygamia, and absolutely that is a good point, Tumbuk. And interestingly enough, the second one, that was see children actual ability when parents helped a lot, and that was not in my reading of the international research. I did not come across this point that much, so I'm really happy that you have pointed it out. So what we know from research literature, we know that nearly, and at the bottom of the slides, I have also some current articles that you might want to explore following this presentation. We know that during COVID, really globally across the 200 countries, more than 90% students with or without a disability, doesn't matter, face disruption to their education. And this slide is really more unpacking the impact of COVID on children's learning, regardless of disability being present or not. And that's something that we have mentioned in many of your comments, that really parents and children were unprepared for the shift. Nobody was, that's true. And so there has become a really increased involvement of parents in supporting the students. And of course, that brought some negatives. There are research studies that highlight how wearing two hats, the teacher's hat and at the same time being a parent, really has been demanding and negatively experienced by parents. But there is a contrary research to that, showing that it actually provided opportunity for the parents and children to create closer bonds, which I think was a lovely finding. And that is also coming to this another research report, which also said that thanks to this very challenging time, many parents gained more understanding of what their children are learning at school, because they had to be so much engaged. So that's one part what research tells us globally. Now, if we look only at parents of children with disabilities, first of all, there definitely is recognized a lack of appropriate materials and resources from schools, and that's a parent's feedback, so to speak. Another one, that teachers were not really being very inclusive during the lockdown, not differentiating the instruction for the students as needed. And I'm not doing this or summarizing the research to blame the teachers. We all did what we could or tried to do our best, but the research shows that these were really the key concerns for parents of children with disabilities. They also felt that very often teachers were not present in the remote learning, so they would use rather pre-recorded lectures or presentations, or would send some tasks for the children, but then not actually have the classes, and rather do one call in with the students in the morning and one in the afternoon. And that was just seen as really difficult and not working for students with disabilities. So this was again, think about some students with disabilities having real difficulties with creating their own routines, and if they create them, it's really hard to leave them. And so it was really recreating everybody's world. They also talked, the parents also talked about finding it really daunting to concentrate and engage at their own employment and also supporting their children, which really increase anxiety in parents. So we have seen increased anxiety in children, but we have also seen increased anxiety in parents. And so these are some of the thoughts of the parents. What else does the research say? There has been a really big change just between 2020 and 2021. So we are looking across the 2 years. There's been growth in using online lessons. And you can see that the growth from 4% to 54% is quite massive over 1 year. Textbooks and other offline methods became really much less relevant for teaching, but also primary and secondary students are now much more engaging in e-learning every day. The two main kind of barriers for students and from students' perspective, according to research, for some students did not have available resources to be online and access resources, and this could be for numerous reasons. This could be because of the socioeconomical reasons that we have mentioned here. For some families, it's just not possible or very, very barely possible to have access to internet or having the devices that they would need. And another big reason was, of course, that even students who had resources at home, so they could be online and they did have the online technology or digital technology to join, there were still different environmental reasons that were serving as barriers. So one, parents working and not having time to assist with online learning, lack of skills. And we know that many of our students have disabilities. Often when they are learning new skills, need a lot of one-to-one instruction and guidance, a lot of example, developing task analysis, etc., and that was not always the case. Some other barriers experienced by students with disabilities, so they definitely reported more frequent difficulties and barriers to transitioning to online learning than their peers without disabilities. Big one, I don't know how about Indonesia, but a really big one and underestimated one, they had much less access to accessing counseling for mental well-being, and so mental health services. And also remember that for some students, it's really difficult to receive such services in online form. We have some students that will just always better engage in person, so that has been particularly difficult as well. And of course, even difficulties with receiving testing accommodation and accessing technical support if needed. So you can see that the difficulties that the students have experienced in this transition to online has been absolutely significant. Important enough, and this was a study conducted in UK, which talked about how there was actually quite a percentage of students who did not have dedicated space to learning at home. And again, it is very often connected to socioeconomic context of the family. And yet we know from research that children need actually a good environments where they could, suitable environments to have a time to concentrate and learn new skills and new concepts, and the settings that are uncomfortable or just ill-designed can actually have a really big impact on their ability not only to concentrate on learning, but then of course impact well-being and the actual learning process. So just the educational spaces at home became quite an issue. There has been, as I said, the research to the point 2020-2021 really deals with the issues transitioning from face-to-face to online. So we are yet to see now research studies, which I'm expecting in 2022 onwards, exploring the impact of changing back from online to coming to face-to-face education. I think that what I would expect from what I've seen and heard in working with schools, definitely we need to pay attention to mental health And for many students being in a lockdown situation and really living in only home space or close by, the anxiety of leaving the space and feeling safe in coming back to the schools will be something to focus on in preparing this transition. And it's for that, of course, collaborating, that interagency collaboration with the school counselors and other relevant school psychologists, etc., will be really, really critical. And of course, there are some evidence-based practices that we can use to support students to gain more confidence in doing or in experiencing this transition. But I would also argue, on the other hand, that for many students with disabilities, it has been really difficult to transition online, and going back to school is something that is actually a bit of a saving grace for them. And so I think we can also harvest that aspect that while they couldn't access their learning for numerous reasons that I have listed, now there is great opportunity to again embrace being back in school and in the environments where instruction is hopefully differentiated by you, all the excellent teachers here, and that we really have in mind the way how we can make the learning accessible and inclusive to all. So I can see, I know there will be some challenges, but I can also actually see some good things that can come out of this. Are there any questions so far before I move to the next part of the presentation, please?
Maybe the questions from Dwi Darwati.
Yes, and so the question was around
what are the best strategy to design play activities, to support children with learning loss. And what she meant by learning loss was
loss of community of school. She wrote it there. Look, I think I'm not necessarily sure, because you are asking about designing play activities, and I'm not sure that I would talk just so specifically about the play activities. I think that the biggest thing is helping students, and we have evidence-based practices we can use to do that. To really just redevelop that connection with school and that self-assurance that school is a safe place. And for that, we know from research that just development of routines in collaboration with the family and the actual student is a big one. Self-management, many students have been really struggling with anxieties, and as you very rightly said, with a deep feeling of loss of school community, and that is not easy to overcome, but just teaching the students some activities to self-regulate these emotions can be really very helpful. And I will give you later on in the presentation a really great link to some evidence-based practices that you can explore in your own pace, and how you could apply them across your school settings. It doesn't matter whether it's special or mainstream school or what level of education, to support the students. So I'm not sure that the play activities would be my answer to this, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Iva.
Of course. And is there any other question to what we have now said in unpacking the research? Was there any surprise for any of you, or really you just expected what I was saying?
Ya, silahkan kalau ada yang mau bertanya, silahkan raise hand atau drop di chat box ya. Silahkan, khususnya tentang tadi mungkin paparan yang disampaikan Iva tentang apa yang dipaparkan oleh riset gitu ya, tentang pengalaman anak-anak selama COVID-19. Atau jika ada pertanyaan yang lainnya silakan. So please, if you have any questions, just raise your hand or just drop your comments in the chat box regarding those what research tell us about the students' experience, yeah, during COVID-19 or towards offline learning, yeah. If you have.
Okay, it seems there are no questions. Everything is clear. So let's continue.
Excuse me, may I ask?
Yes, of course, please.
Hello, Professor Iva.
Hi.
My name is Anita. Actually, I want to know that maybe you have research that how to teach children with disabilities or without disabilities in order to teach them to be able to select the environment. Because I'm interested in your slide that children need to be able to select environments so they can focus in order to master difficult new concepts. That maybe you have experience or research about this. Would you please to tell us about that? Thank you.
Yeah, that's great question. Thank you so much. The research that exists even prior to COVID looked at the learning spaces and what their impact can be on students' concentration and ability to gain knowledge or to achieve the learning outcomes. And so there is quite a body of research prior to COVID. But what the COVID literature is telling us that it's not actually even about the choice of the, sadly, about the choice of learning environment, but it's about situations where, you know, big family lives together in a small space where the students wouldn't have even their own desk where they can do schoolwork, and which might be, or there would be just one desk where the siblings take turns, but suddenly when you are at homeschooling and then everybody needs that space, means, you know, creativity of parents and trying to find and do whatever they can best. But that means that the learning spaces that are often at home created out of must really might not be very didactical, might not really allow for the concentration, for comfortable and, you know, safe seating, etc., which then in as an outcome really badly affect the students' concentration and ability to learn. And so I think the big thing, it again highlights how important it is for students to now have that access to come back to school, having that those learning spaces that are designed for students to actually be able to concentrate, and how much this is critical at home. And we can't influence it at home, or really there is only to a very little degree. If the family is having in very poor conditions and you have many family members living in a very small space, you can't do anything as a teacher. You know, you can't magically develop a good learning space for the child. So I think I think the research more alerts us that even like if we don't talk about the access to online learning, if we don't talk about sometimes difficulty to engage in that space, for some students they are even in much more disadvantaged position than that, because they don't even have that learning environment that would nourish their learning. And so some of the impact of the COVID that we have seen can you know, this lack of safe learning environments may have made the situation even much worse, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Iva, I think I agree with Bu Anita. Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. Yeah, about students being able to select environment. It's
yes.
Yeah, especially. Do you think, Iva, that can happen in school setting when they are, you know, back to school learning?
I think that would be absolutely wonderful if the students had choice, and it wouldn't happen probably over a larger scale, but at least for students having a choice to go to an environment that is safe for them and where they can concentrate, that's a long-standing recommendation and practice. In special and inclusive education, I really see that very interconnected. And so, for example, very common practice is that there would be a example in Australia, but it's very much grounded in research. There would be a support learning spaces or classrooms where when the student with or without disabilities, really, but usually they are more designed for those with disabilities or identified needs, support needs. When they feel overwhelmed by the environment, it can be because of the noise, it can be the visual stimulation, it can be many other reasons, that they can go to that space where it's quiet, when they can really work on their own, when there is a learning support teacher who comes to them and can provide support if needed. That is something that is absolutely cherished by research, and I think all our schools should strive to have those spaces for students. So I don't think, well, maybe one day in magic future, because who knows what future brings, but hardly we will achieve that every student can choose the space in the school as the schools are built now. But making sure that there are a few of those spaces that can be used by students, relaxation room where the student who is overwhelmed, and we have such an increase of students with mental health difficulties. I don't know how about Indonesia, but globally, the reports I have said that there has been massive increase of mental health issues already before COVID. Australia had actually from roughly, because I don't remember exactly, but I think it was between 2009 and 2015 or 16, there was an increase of students with mental health issues in classrooms, and that increase was 140%. 100% more, that's massive. There was only one population that beat this, and that was population of students on the autism spectrum, which had 160% increase. So having these safe learning spaces, but also safe relaxation spaces when just life is too much for students, I think that's very wise, Anita, and really needed. And we can do that in schools. We can do much less in homes or students' home, but we can do that in schools.
It would be amazing if Indonesian teachers or Indonesian schools could provide those safe learning spaces or spaces that could support the mental health of our students, especially during the transition. Maybe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have the excellent question in a chat from Melati. So there is, in your opinion, what kind of ideal online study activities or strategy for children with disability, in particular those with neurodevelopmental disorders such as autism or ADHD? That's a fantastic question, and I will, as we continue in the presentation, I will talk about some of the evidence-based practices that I would definitely recommend, and that can be incorporated in online or offline learning. And I would like to highlight here again that I know it takes a lot of skill, but still online and offline are spaces. Those are contexts in which the learning is happening. But we still need to go to the good pedagogies and do good practices that are grounded by research. And if I say evidence-based practice, I don't mean that one article was written about that approach and it's evidence-based, right? That there has to be very, very rigorous body of research that would say, actually, this strategy works for specific students. So, for example, to answer the question, Melati, if I would look on online study activities, I'm not sure that I think there are many needs that would be similar for students on autism spectrum or those with ADHD, but some would be very different. And so for students on the autism spectrum, I think either online or offline incorporating task analysis as much as possible. That's a very good evidence-based practice that you can use and that can really help the student to understand the instruction that you are giving them. And there has been, I've just came across a study, which I'm happy to share with Elga and she can send to you, that was just done in 2021, I'm pretty sure. And they were looking at increasing students' engagement in online learning by combining task analysis and I think it was the reinforcement, which positive reinforcement, which is another approach, and they have worked with students who had disabilities like autism, and they use single subject approach, single subject design, and they were able to prove that the using task analysis in these online activities have increased the students' participation and learning in the online activity. So that would be like one thing that I would immediately think about. I think sometimes it's also very hard to kind of understand the activity for the students, and so for those on autism spectrum, even find ways to use social stories, and that can really help them to understand the situations, including transition from online learning back to school. Social stories is such a fantastic practice, and you can develop the social stories together with the family. You can walk the students through the story online, but really help them to prepare to return to school. So these are just some immediate, rather than just simple activities, really pedagogical considerations that I would have. I hope I answered your questions, Melati. Okay, so some great questions, Anita and Melati. Thank you so much. I love when you ask. If I will not know the answer, I will find out for you, because that can definitely happen. And moving on to another questions that I promised to think about is, what are the schooling transition needs of students both with and without disabilities when moving from online to face-to-face learning? And you know, this is a very difficult question to answer, to be honest, because these needs will be just so individual. I don't think they are necessary. Some needs will be more typical for students with specific disabilities, but some go across. And so it's really hard to talk about the needs. I think that for me, again, absolutely critical is always the knowledge of the student, talking with the student themselves and asking them what their needs are, because they will tell you. And you can actually engage students also with more with higher support needs. You can engage students who don't use verbal communication. You can use arts-based methods, for example, to elicit the responses. So I think if you take one thing from this lecture, please make it that you talk to the student directly and you ask them about their support needs, and you ask them what has helped them in the past and maybe what you could use again. I think that would be one big thing that I would talk about or think about. And so moving to this part, like talking about the support needs, I want to, before I give you some answers, I want to unpack and find out from you, and we can again annotate or just raise hand or use chat, and we can do across languages. Yes, of course, Melati, you can ask the question, and please, before you ask it, just when, so you have here what are your key considerations in supporting students in returning to face-to-face? So you all came here, and I can see that there is 62 participants joining us here. You all came here because you know this is critical. So what are some considerations that are on your mind? You don't have to have answers, but just some thoughts about supporting students returning. So please feel free to start annotating, and please, Melati, ask another question. And of course, you can type it on or ask whatever, like ask verbally, whatever works for you better. And while you are typing the question, so what are your considerations in supporting students in returning to face-to-face teaching? I'm sure you have many, probably more concerns than answers, but
And I also believe that the students who are doing the research on school transition will have questions too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, please ask. I love research students' questions. They are usually very complex.
Yeah.
Keep us on our toes. So please ask away.
Ya, jadi silakan ini teman-teman yang tergabung dalam riset payung sekolah transisi CLSD, silakan menyampaikan pertanyaannya untuk Iva ya. Lalu di sini ada pertanyaan dari Iva, silakan dijawab. Apa sih menurut Anda ya hal-hal kunci, ya hal yang sangat penting ketika kita ingin memberikan support pada anak-anak untuk transisi dari online ke tatap muka, ya semua anak ya, tidak harus yang berkebutuhan khusus. Silahkan.
No considerations.
We're still waiting. Yeah, people are thinking and then typing.
That's good. Making so there is a question from Melati.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So that needs making some assessment. I think we have no. Yes, absolutely. We definitely need to know first about how the students themselves, you know, what they think, what they feel, what they need. Absolutely, that's beautifully put. And I'm looking at the considerations on the slide. Give a child a chance to become familiar with their school. Oh, beautiful. Don't know who wrote it, but beautiful. And so again, you know, some of your students are coming, already have been in your school before pandemic and are coming back. And so it's that encouragement and yes, empathy. Thank you. I was just going to say that was perfect timing. And you can of course support them. Some students will come to your schools who you didn't have before. They might be moving schools or moving from primary to secondary, or they might. And so that point about giving child a chance to become familiar with the school is absolutely critical. That is usually some of the evidence-based practices that are used for students with disabilities include, for example, visual support. And so, and using the social stories. So example, I have seen many parents developing kind of like, and ideally, honestly, it should be schools, but it is not always the case, developing or preparing a result. Opening each photo with just a plain sentence or two explaining it. So it's really creating kind of like a nice introduction and overview for the student to familiarize themselves with the spaces in the school, with the faces of the teachers that they will be seeing, but also getting a bit of idea of activities what they will be doing. And this is incredibly powerful approach. And honestly, I think it's silly that we forget to do it as schools and as teachers, and then we leave it on parents, and then parents do it, for their own child. While if you did such a resource for your whole school and made it available to parents and to your students, you would make such a difference, and it would be appreciated not just by students with disabilities. Another one is social stories, writing a social story about coming back, coming to the school, and familiarizing oneself with the building and activity and so on. So really good considerations. Thank you so much. There is social and emotional support, absolutely critical. And I think talking about interagency collaboration, we need to work better and more efficiently with the school counselors as teachers. And now, I don't know your situation in Indonesia. What we really struggle with in Australia is just lack of school counselors. I have just read the latest study, and it was shocking. There is one school counselor for 750 children. Now, and most of the schools have school counselor up to 4 days a week. Now, if you think about the schools being of big size, many students struggling with mental health, as I've told you, the statistics anyhow. And there are students who think about committing suicide and try to do okay, yeah.
Because well, our population is a lot bigger, and I think we also lack of a school counselor. Yeah, not all schools have school counselor. And in regard to face-to-face learning, I think the preparation that has been done by school, they more focus on the, of course, it's important, the health protocols.
Yeah. I would say, as then thinking at your school meetings and discussing with your school principal, okay, these are the statistics. We know that there will be definitely more anxiety, more depression in students, and etc., etc. What do we have in place? If there is a lack of school counselors, what are our alternatives? Are there any non-for-profit organizations we could collaborate with? Is there anywhere we can bring help to support the social and emotional well-being of our students? I think you almost can't do transition without that. But to me, that goes to that interagency collaboration. And that is a really good point from, okay, I don't know if I do it right, Hayuning. Hopefully it was good, about the collaboration between school and parents, absolutely critical one. And there is a question about what is the most important aspect that teachers must prepare for school transitions. Well, I think to give you an answer, I will actually move to the next slide. Let me just clear the drawings. I actually think that what we really need to focus on, and transitions are prime time for that, no matter what kind of transition, is think how we can develop self-determination skills in our students. And to take part in the planning. And so again, I'm repeating, coming back to the core, to have the student at the center of the transition planning. I think that development of the self-determination, it's very often an afterthought. I know we sometimes tend to try to kind of put away the immediate fires, but this is really very much about the succeeding of the student during the transition, if well approached. And what we know from research, that students with disabilities and without, but particularly with disabilities, because they do tend to have worse post-school outcomes, we know that those who are more self-determined are more likely to be employed after school, are more likely to engage in further education, have more independent lives and more successful lives. So I think that focus on self-determination to me is key. And really, it's then a bit of exploring how we can do it within the context of returning back to school. And again, asking the student in advance, what are they worried about? What are they looking forward to? What would they like to see in school? You are absolutely developing their self-determination skill. You are giving them a say about matters relevant to them, and that's really critical. And I just want to kind of highlight in this context that I say self-determination, and it's such a complex area, isn't it? Because self-determination is much more than just one thing. It is very much about the skills. And I think when we talk about self-determination, very often that's what we think about the first. So it's like goal setting, making decisions, solving problems, self-regulation. You remember how I talked about self-regulation, and many of our students will have increased issues with self-regulation coming back from online space to school, suddenly not being on gadgets or having less supervision from parents when the parents couldn't manage, and suddenly having a lot of, being seen by the teachers what they're doing. So these are absolutely critical skills. And Vinny mentioned social skills, and really the social and communication skills are a part of the spectrum as well. So thank you, Vinny. Another area of self-determination, though, is also the knowledge. So just that self-awareness, and again, asking your student always first is developing their self-awareness. What do I need? Very often our students don't even think about that. They might be subconsciously anxious, but actually teaching them those metacognitive strategies to think, what is it that I need? What is it that I need at this moment, at this point of time, or what am I afraid of? It can be anything. It's really important. And it's also learning about one person's rights. What's my right? I have a right to high quality education, and I have a right for teachers to engage in transition planning, which you're doing. And I have a right to have a differentiated instruction if I have a disability that requires that. But it's also about knowing my responsibilities, not just rights. But it also is about those attitudes and beliefs. And we know that many students especially those with disabilities, lack confidence, lack self-esteem. And this has become even more profound with the impact of COVID and isolation and being left to inner doubts, which many teenagers have anyhow, but then you compound it with other things. So I think, again, like my of how you can do it, and you can really develop all of those self-determination skills beautifully within different subject areas or outside them. So I just would like to encourage us to have this in mind when supporting the transition. Any comment to that or question or disagreement? No,
Yeah,
trust me, I will fight for my self-determination though.
Yeah, I think when we talk about Indonesian context, education in Indonesian context, I think self-determination is again something that is rarely being taught by teachers. Please, participant, my students, and also teachers here, what do you think? Is self-determination is something that teachers usually that teachers are familiar with and encourage their students to, you know, to do so, or else, yeah, or something else, yeah. What do you think? Any teachers here or any students here want to give their comments? Because what I found often is teachers are busy to make sure that her or his materials, you know, to be finished. Yeah. So, oh, here we have questions from Tiara.
Oh, this is really a really interesting question, Tiara, and I really like that. There is a difference between the both concepts, and I would be very happy to send you some literature around that. But you are right that there are some aspects of these both constructs that are in common, such as for students to be ready for school. You do want the development of students' competencies and skills, and you do want to involve family, etc., for the successful start of the school attendance, let's say. But the transitions, the concept of schooling transition is much wider. So it is that change from, as I said at the beginning in the definition, from one stage or the other, and that change is not just kind of one of like starting the school. It is a whole process that involves quite a lot of skills and factors that affect that, and considerations and multiple players that are there. And for many students with disabilities, it takes really long time. And very often, once you finish with one transition planning process, you might as well transition into another one. And I think both are really important constructs, but they are different. But you are absolutely right that there are similarities and overlaps. So when we look at the, going back to the taxonomy for transition planning and all those 5 key pillars. So your lovely question, Tiara, led us back to this model. How, what are the ways we can actually, because there's the question I want to, what kind of supports are necessary for students. So I think from the bigger picture, it is making sure that all these 5 pillars are addressed and we keep them in mind, and we don't focus heavily on one and forget the other ones. For me, absolutely having the student fully involved and being in center of the planning. But then we can think about what are the actual strategies or practices that we can use to support this transition. And I would really like to focus this part on evidence-based practices. And as I said, I'll share the link to some really good ones. But just to define what I mean by that, so it's not every practice that we use. It is practices that are based on high quality, very rigorous research that have been done with hundreds of different students So we have data from that at a range of places. So the research has not just been done in America, it has been done more widely, for example, and look at over a range of different behaviors or areas of skills. And it is practices that have to have measurable benefit. And so one of the common downfalls I do see in schools is that to support students in transitions, sometimes the practices are used that teachers seen other teachers using, or they have experienced it when they were students in schools many years ago. But very often some of these practices are not grounded in any research and really do not lead to students' outcomes. So I would like just to very much encourage you to include explore these. And if you want to support your successful student transition currently to face-to-face learning, but beyond the COVID pandemic, much more widely to the different transitions I've mentioned, please make sure that your practice is research-based, that you are not wasting time on using practices that lead to nothing, because then you are wasting your time and you are even more regrettably wasting the students' time with you and their ability to develop their skills. So being reflective practitioners using these practices, I think, is really critical. And before I go to specific examples, like I think one of the, it's not just like, choosing one practice and I'm doing it all the time. You always are choosing the practice, the particular evidence-based practice based on students' characteristics. So you need to know your students, an environment in which you will be using the practice. Another thing that is important is that you get familiar with that practice. And so these evidence-based practices have certain like steps or elements, and you can't freestyle with them. We as teachers are sometimes really creative, right? And kind of start to adapt practices to what we need at the moment. And then we complain that the practice didn't work, but we forget that we did not implement it with fidelity. That's the professional term that we use. So it's really using the practice as it was designed to achieve the outcomes. And another point where I often feel find gaps is that the monitoring of student progress. So we need to keep on continuously collecting data. We need to make records whether using that specific practice the student is starting to achieve their outcomes. Because that will inform us then, do I continue to use that practice or do I look for another one? So it's a really important cycle that again, I would like to encourage you to be always mindful of. So I've mentioned some of these already, some useful evidence-based practices to support students to transition either to or from online learning or back to face-to-face learning. Task analysis, really very powerful, and you can do task analysis in a form of a written task, really providing that developed instruction and break down the activity into individual steps that are needed, because for some students you really need to be more explicit. But you can, for some students who might have higher support needs, one of you mentioned here autism, for example, they might need pictorial representation of each step to understand it. So there are different ways you can do task analysis, but definitely you can use it very well. Writing social stories so that students can really nicely understand why specific skill that you are trying to teach them, etc. And another one is around the self-management. That's another evidence-based practice. Visual supports are another one. I can keep on going with many more, and again I'll provide a website that you can use to get the information. In fact, I will do it right now, because this is fantastic website. And what will cheer you up, all of you, is that it is free of charge. So we don't have to pay really big money. So let me just put it on here. So I'll share the link and also show you. So I can walk you through. So link into the chat is now here. And now let me share the screen. So I love this website. To use it and to access all learning materials, you need to sign up. You don't pay anything. You just create an account. That's all you do. So please do that. Now, these modules are all on different individual evidence-based practices that we use with students. This is focused on those of them that work with students on the autism spectrum. Many of these work with other students as well, and you can find it in the literature. So this is, regardless, this is just fantastic. So for example, you will have here reinforcement, exercise. You all know exercise, functional behavior assessment. Those here who are special educators have maybe now a little dance of joy because you know how important it is. Modeling, parent implemented interventions, really important practice. I think many of us know peer-mediated instruction. And again, peer-mediated instruction doesn't mean that I just pair a student with disability with another student and say, do your best. It has actually very discrete steps that I need to make sure I implement to make it efficient for both students. PECs, some of you heard about. Prompting, you probably do all the time in the classes anyhow. Scripting, self-management, I really extremely recommend this module. You will find it handy. Social narratives is another word for social stories. Structured play group. So somebody asked here about the play. Maybe you can find there some things that would be useful. Task analysis, technology edit instruction is a very, very legitimate evidence-based practice that can be used. Video modeling. So, playing finding the videos where you can show the desired behavior or learning for the student. And you can do this very, very well for transition planning, including the one back to face-to-face teaching and learning. You can see that each of these evidence-based practices are discrete modules which will take you, each of them will take you about 1.5 hours to 2 hours to complete. They are very practical. They give you a beautiful sheets and practical resources that you can use in your classrooms. Obviously, you will have to translate them. Sorry, it's only in English, but I think visual support such a great evidence practice. So transition you're doing, including the one we are talking or focusing on today.
So Iva, if
yes?
well, that resource is specialized for children with autism, but there's a saying that if it's good practice for a student with disability, that's a good practice for others as well. Yeah, yes.
Honestly, if you look into the research on the evidence-based practices, they actually tell you which practices have been tried and function for which groups of students. And so that doesn't mean it doesn't work for others. It just means that most research has been done in that area. And so there are many, these are all of them really. I can't think about any that wouldn't be there. All of them have been verified also for students with intellectual disabilities, for example. Many of those have been verified for students with dyslexia, ADHD, like for example, direct instruction, video modeling and things like that. And then going to your saying, Elga, honestly, any student will benefit from such a good practice. But like when you go to research literature, they will tell you about the groups where we already have gathered the evidence. So even if this is, I don't know about any, there are some other resources that I can, about the evidence-based practices I can give you, but none of them has these fantastic resources where you can do modules for each practice. And so I wouldn't be necessarily worried it says autism, because it, again, you can really use it very widely.
Yeah, because I think not many teachers or students realize that those resources is basically has benefit universal.
Absolutely. You could not say it better. Absolutely. So please explore them, and you will be amazed how what a difference it will make. Also, because you know how I really highlighted the self-determination and its importance for successful transition, any transition, including the one back to face-to-face learning. So there are some ways we can teach self-determination, and there are some evidence-based practices to teach self-determination. Computer-assisted instruction, definitely. I love self-directed IEP, can't stop to highlight it, which really means that the student has the central role in developing their educational plan, and if nothing else, they are actively present during the meetings and all the preparation. The peer-assisted instruction is again excellent. So thinking about how I can work with the whole peer group to support the transition is beneficial to all of your students. And then I cannot highlight enough the self-management instruction. So if you maybe want to start with one of those evidence-based practices modules and just go from there, do that. It's a really good one. And I just put here some more resources for you that you will have on the slides that I will be, I'll send you. There is the What Works Clearinghouse is really good, because you can actually type there the name of the practice and it will tell you whether it's evidence-based or not, which is very handy, I have to tell you. Or you can look for different groups of students with and without disabilities. And these are just some do's and don'ts when you decide to use evidence-based practices in your transition planning. So I'll just let you engage with it, but definitely it's a mistake to think that each and every single evidence-based practice will work for every student. That's why I said that it's important to know the individual students and their needs. And so even if the student, if the evidence-based practice such as self-management has absolutely incredible research evidence for specific group of students, it still might be that it won't work for that one student for whatever reasons. And so then rest assured that there are many others that you can choose from. There are so many evidence-based practices I can choose from to achieve academic outcomes or social skills outcomes. Some of you mentioned social skills in the chat, or communication outcomes, so self-determination, transition outcomes. So you have a great choice. So if you find out something doesn't work, that's not the end of the world. You just go back and choose something else. I have noticed that there is a comment, or
there's a question from Primalita Putri Distina.
With learning clothes because of the online learning, lack of internet connection. Look, I think absolutely important to me would be just encouraging the students that even if they disconnected for a time from learning, and that's a very valid point you wrote, Primalita, that's not the end of the world. So you don't want to even exacerbate that stress that they will fall even further behind. I think it's really important from the beginning to make sure that you give all your students some opportunity of lack of internet connection or other reasons, they can still be successful in that. So I think it's actually at the beginning building that confidence again and meeting the students where they are. In all honesty, if you now stop thinking about COVID and return back from online learning to face, I bet that each of you as the teachers here had students coming to your class where their reading age, for example, was really much lower than other students. So while your other students were reading to learn, these students were just learning to read. And again, it's what do I do at such a situation is, of course, meeting the students where they are and help them to develop the skills from there. And it sometimes needs interagency collaboration, bringing some other people, working this out with the student and family. But yeah, I think really encouraging them, not creating the atmosphere of fear. I've lost so much in my education, and now I will be even further behind. Giving them opportunities for success in the classroom, not just first day, please keep it going for quite a while, and meeting them where they are, with their knowledge, with their skills. You can't do more.
Start where they are, yeah?
Start with, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's as simple as that. You can't do more, but I see many teachers who kind of keep on trying to start where they think the student should be. And there is one thing of high expectations. We should have high expectations of all students, but then there is another thing which is called impossible expectations. And, you know, we don't want that. That is setting the student up for failure. And, you know, the more we disencourage in this way the student, the less they engage with school, which opens them much more vulnerable also to engagement, for example, with juvenile justice systems. And so, you know, we are their chance. Any other questions or thoughts?
Ya, silahkan yang mau bertanya, boleh raise hand, boleh tulis di chat box ya. Okay. Oh, actually.
Yes.
No, sorry. Just I just realized that it's all 7 minutes to go.
Yes, that's why I'm saying. I know the time flies, but I think we've really covered such an important topic, and I want to thank you, Elga, for coming up with the idea for this topic, because I think it's really timely and inspirational, really. I haven't seen anybody doing it in Australia, and it's such an important topic. So it's great that you initiated this. I think it's really important. Any questions? I'm sure there are many.
Yeah.
You also, Elga, can give you my email, and so, or I can type it now into
yes,
the message.
Yes.
Yeah. So you know, maybe now you are just, you know, thinking about all we have been talking about, but you very often we have questions after the event. I don't know how about you, but very often I come home and I think, I should have asked this. So you might have that moment, and if that happens, just send me an email. I'm only email away.
Ya, silahkan ya. Kalau saat ini masih ada yang mau ditanyakan, silahkan, masih ada 5 menit ya. Boleh raise hand, boleh tulis di chat box pakai bahasa Indonesia atau bahasa Inggris, silahkan. Ini Iva is going to give us her email address, so you can also contact Iva if you have any questions later on, after we finish this session. Yeah, because I think school transition is something that quite new. Well, I haven't found this topic being researched in Indonesian context. Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I agree. There is not much. I can't. No, there's not much at all about
school readiness. I think we have quite a lot research on school readiness. One of the participants asked about school readiness. Yeah, usually from early childhood to primary school, yeah, or from primary school to secondary school, and then from secondary school to high school. Yeah, but school transition really discuss anything about changes from one situation to another situation is very rarely researched in the Indonesian context. So,
and it's not just that lead up to, like, with the readiness to starting, but then it's the continuous support to make sure that people are striving in that situation and are learning skills. And so the schooling transition, they do have a longer period of time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we hope that we call it umbrella research. I'm not sure what same thing maybe. Yeah. So our umbrella research is school transition during the pandemic from online to offline learning.
That's great.
And we have around 8 students who has their own specific topic still related to
brilliant. I think that's a great thing, and you are building the body of knowledge then that can then in return inform the practice. So that's amazing.
Thank you. And we also have a focus on the social and emotional aspect because we are in the Faculty of Psychology, so we want to know we want to focus on the emotional and social aspect of the children, and also not a specific aspect that the each students are interested in. So,
I think that's brilliant. And also, like, we also know that if I will go back, I know that it's not just students with disability, and we talked about the percentages, but many students with disability do have also co-occurrence of emotional difficulties or mental health issues. And some of them have really high percentage. Like I've read now research talking about autism with coexistence of anxiety, depression, OCD, etc., around 80%. Like these are really high coexistences, and we need to know how to support our students appropriately. So I think it's great that you're focusing on that area.
Yeah, thank you so much, Iva. Yeah, so we understand that schools have prepared their students in terms of health protocols. But again, do they consider about this emotional and social aspect of the children? In advance, or during, and like this, it's a continuous a process.
Absolutely. So. And I think what you said, like, in advance, because like I would start planning now, and if we don't have enough school counselors, the students will need the support. So where do we get it? What are the protocols we develop? What that are in place? And then really just the for the students to to give them those skills to make the decisions and to speak up and to engage with their transition and make it success.
That self-determination aspect is again in Indonesian context is a bit lacking, I think.
Then it's great we're talking about it, because that's so needed. And again, something it's so confirmed by research, and actually like globally in countries similar to Indonesia or Czech Republic, where I'm originally from. I'm not talking just about the the usual countries that we talk about.
I think we have one question here, and I think maybe that's our final question. Eva, do you want to
So that is, I encourage children to study together, to teach their friends how to read and write. I think generally that's great to support each other, but I would maybe encourage, so generally good, but I would encourage you to go to those AFER modules and do the peer-mediated instruction one, because there is a lot more that goes into that, and you probably do it and you just didn't write it here in detail, but it's very much the whole art is in making sure who you match with whom. How do you prepare both parties for that working together? How do you check on how the relationship and the skills development is going? What things need to be put in place? Like it is much more complex than that, but you can achieve so much with it. So I would say yes, it's good, but if you want to make it even better, I would learn a bit more about the peer-mediated instruction. And have a wonderful day or evening or whatever it is at your end. It's 5, isn't it? No.
Yes, it's 5,
Yeah.
and have a very good rest, Eva, and enjoy your weekend. Yeah.
Thank you. You too, and feel free to email if you have any questions. Don't be shy. I am very open.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you
Eva.
for having me, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye. Yeah. So students and colleagues, once again, thank you so much for attending our session and contributing to the discussion. So we hope that you will again joining us in our future event. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Bu Elga.
Yeah. Oh iya, Salma. Lupa ya, Salma. Mau menyampaikan beragam sosial media CLSD. Terima kasih, Salma. Aku malah lupa. Terima kasih, Salma dan teman-teman CLSD. Sampai ketemu di event berikutnya. Buat yang masih di sini, terima kasih sudah hadir. Follow sosmednya CLSD.
Terima kasih Bu Elga.
Ya, sama-sama.